Okay, everybody, I hope you're ready for this because we've got one issue of Night Terrors left to talk about before the regular Green Lantern series resumes next month, so let's jump right in. Night Terrors Green Lantern number 2, written by Jeremy Adams, with art by Eduardo Pensica, Jordi Tarragona, and Julio Ferreira, colors by Luis Guerrero, and letters by Dave Sharp. The title of this issue is Doorways. This issue picks up right where the last one left off, with the nightmare version of Parallax attacking Hal Jordan, morphing from the bug-like fear entity into the more classic Emerald Twilight version. The nightmare creature impersonating Parallax is gloating about how he finally found Hal's greatest fears, buried deep inside, even noting that Hal's fears taste different from most people's. And Hal can't help but smile because of how badly the bad guy misread the situation. As Hal explains it, none of those nightmares represented his fears. They were all moments where he could have given in to fear, but chose to push forward instead. This monster expected to have complete dominion over Hal's mind, but instead it has no power over Hal at all. And Hal proves it by punching this thing in the face so hard they probably heard it in the real world. I should point out that last issue I thought the being invading Hal's mind was Insomnia, the big bad of the Night Terrors event. But in this issue, the villain talks about Insomnia as being its master, so I guess there are nightmare henchmen searching the minds of heroes and villains looking for the Nightmare Stone. I don't know who or what this henchman is, like, is it a person or a literal nightmare come to life? I guess it doesn't matter, since this issue is really only focused on action from here on out. Hal chases Nightmare Parallax back through all the scenarios we saw last issue, only this time none of them even slow him down. Most of this issue is Hal smiling and flexing his way through a big action scene, culminating with him mustering enough willpower to force the nightmare monster out of his mind, waking up in the real world just in time to take control of Carol's private jet before it can crash. As Hal flies off to help the other heroes fight Insomnia, he surrounds the plane with a construct fighter jet for some reason. Maybe because he's taking the plane into combat, and maybe because he just prefers flying jets. Either way, I hope he at least drops Carol and the pilot off before doing any more superhero business. This issue isn't what I was expecting at all. To me, it feels completely different from what we got last month, and I don't think that's a good thing. I love the idea of Hal being the toughest possible opponent for a villain who's trying to invade your mind and weaponize your own nightmares against you, but I think this story took that idea too far. In my opinion, one of the smartest changes ever made to Green Lantern was removing the concept of lanterns being fearless. First by having Kyle Rayner be a totally average person who bypassed all normal recruitment standards, and then using the introduction of the Parallax entity in Green Lantern Rebirth to show us that actually nobody is truly without fear. One of the most important contributions that Geoff Johns made to Green Lantern was to show us that people who claim to be fearless are just denying a part of themselves, which leaves them vulnerable. Seeing Hal steamroll over his worst nightmares like they're nothing does feel kind of appropriate, but it also feels contradictory to the meaning you can derive from those nightmares. I talked at length last issue about how the Abin Sur nightmare speaks to the exact problems Hal has been having since returning to Earth, so seeing him gleefully brush it off this time is disappointing. There's always room to say that this is just Hal ignoring his problems in favor of a quick and easy solution, but it still makes this chapter feel like a waste. The impulsive fearlessness of classic Hal Jordan make him exist in this weird space, where in order to act like himself, we have to remove some depth from his character. He either doesn't have any fears, or he always pushes past them no matter what, bypassing a major struggle that helps to define most other people, and makes it feel like something is missing from Hal. There are moments in here that are perfect, like Hal's reaction right before he goes to punch Nightmare Parallax, but they're counterbalanced by scenes that don't feel true to Hal's character at all. The Hal Jordan we've been reading about for the last 3 issues wouldn't say, "Hey fam," and then massacre a room full of zombies with a chainsaw and a shotgun. Hal wouldn't even know that turn of phrase, and I really don't see him as the type to enjoy cheesy horror movies like Evil Dead, which this entire fight scene is drawing on. That's an idea. All the Earth Lanterns getting together for a weekly movie night where they take turns picking the movie. God, I would love that. Also, for what it's worth, I don't really like the art after the big punch. I definitely appreciate the more cartoony style, but I do not care for Hal being drawn so extremely angry and muscular. There were a few pages that look like bad 90s comics trying way too hard to be extreme. Also, what's with all the construct guns? This isn't really Hal's style. So yeah, I think this was a pretty big step down from the previous issue. Hal doesn't really feel like himself, and all of the interesting nuance that we got to explore last time was thrown out the window in favor of an action scene that honestly would have made more sense if this was Guy Gardner instead of Hal Jordan. There's an editor's note on the last page that says we can follow Hal into the pages of Night Terror's Night's End, but honestly I really don't want to. Night Terror's Green Lantern #1 built up a lot of goodwill with me that all got burned by Night Terror's Green Lantern #2. All I want right now is to leave this event behind and get back to the real story when Green Lantern #3 comes out next month. But before we go, let's wrap up the Sinestro backup story written by Alex Segura, with art by Mario Facilio, colors by Prasad Rao, and letters by Dave Sharp. The title this time is Shards from the Looking Glass Part 2. Sinestro is torn between the hero he used to be and the monster he became, and this time a nightmare version of his daughter Saranac Natu shows up to make him feel even worse about himself. There's not really much to say about this story except for this one panel where Saranac is first mentioned. She's referred to as those you should have loved but instead have forsaken, to which Sinestro replies, my daughter, Saranac, and the monster says, and there is another. That's a very curious line to include considering they don't have any other characters appear in this nightmare after Saranac is introduced. The way it was phrased makes it sound like Sinestro may have another child out there somewhere, which I guess could be cool when we eventually get to it, but right now all we're left with is the same general misery as last issue. I know I brought this up last time, but it bears repeating. This whole story requires you to buy into the core premise that Sinestro views his servitude during Dark Crisis to be something that outshines everything he's ever achieved in his entire life. And I'm sorry, but I just don't. I don't buy it at all. And this story does absolutely nothing to convince me why I should. They completely take for granted that we must all agree on this absurd premise, and then use it to tell the most basic, by-the-numbers scenario they could have gone with, and there's nothing interesting about any of it. And then it just ends. Sinestro is just awake and out of the nightmare, and I have absolutely no idea why. It honestly feels like they just ran out of pages, so Sinestro is magically awake and all better, despite not having actually learned or accomplished anything. I do want to note that some of the art on the Evil Nightmare Sinestro looked really cool. That and the tease of a potential family member to be revealed sometime later are the only good things about this story. So, what did you think of Night Terror's Green Lantern? Are there any miniseries or one-shots in the Night Terrors event that you think I'd enjoy, since I usually really like horror comics? And most importantly, if all the Green Lanterns from Earth met up for a weekly movie night, what movies would each of them pick out for the group to watch? I think Simon would pick nothing but Fast and the Furious movies every time it's his turn. What do you think? Tell me all about it in the comments section down below, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see more of my ongoing coverage of every new Green Lantern comic as they come out. Everyone, thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan. We'll talk again soon.